The year is 2014. We find ourselves in Renton, Washington, a place that looks like any other slice of American suburbia. It is July, the middle of summer, where the days are long and the nights are supposed to be warm and comforting. In an apartment complex on Martin Luther King Jr. Way, life appears to be moving at its usual, steady pace. This is where Tatanysha Hedman lives. She is 40 years old, a woman who, like many others, is just trying to build a stable life for herself and her family. She shares this home with her husband, Vincent Phillips, a man 12 years her senior at 52. To the outside world, they are just another couple, perhaps dealing with the mundane struggles of marriage and money, but nothing that would suggest the nightmare that is about to unfold. There is a third person in this equation, the most important one, Tatanysha's 7-year-old daughter. She is the light of the home, an innocent child who trusts the adults around her to protect her, to keep the monsters at bay. Vincent is her stepfather, a figure who is supposed to be a guardian, a second father. In the quiet corners of that apartment, however, the trust that holds a family together is being eroded secretly and violently. It is often said that a mother's intuition is a powerful thing, a primal radar that detects threats before they are seen. But sometimes the threat is so close, so intimate, that the mind refuses to accept it until it is undeniable. The horror of this story does not begin with the fire. It begins with the truth. It begins in the days leading up to July 16th, when the veil is lifted. We do not know the exact hour the clock stopped for Tatanysha, but we know the moment she learned the devastating secret that would shatter her sanity. Imagine the silence of a room when a child finally gathers the courage to speak the unspeakable. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a suspicion. It was a confirmation. Tatanysha learned that Vincent, the man sleeping in her bed, the man eating at her table, had sexually assaulted her little girl. The revelation didn't just break her heart. It incinerated her reality. You have to understand the specific kind of madness that descends upon a mother in a moment like that. It is not just anger. Anger is too small a word. It is a biological rewiring. The man she knew ceased to exist. In his place stood a monster, a predator who had preyed on the one thing she was sworn to protect. The apartment, once a sanctuary, transformed into a crime scene, a cage where she was trapped with the beast. For most people, the next step is the phone. You call the police. You scream for help. You pack bags and run. Tatanysha likely played all these scenarios in her mind. But something dark was blooming in the pit of her stomach. A cold, hard realization that the law is slow and the law is distant. Handcuffs? A trial? Prison time? These are civilized responses to a civilized crime. But what Vincent did was feral. It was a violation of nature. And as Tatanysha looked at her daughter, and then at the man who caused her pain, the concept of justice began to warp. She didn't want him just punished. She wanted him erased. She wanted him to feel the hell he had introduced into their lives. The seed of a plan began to form, not a plan of escape, but a plan of absolute, scorching retribution. The air in the apartment must have felt heavy, thick with a tension that only Tatanysha could feel. While Vincent went about his routine, perhaps believing his secrets were safe in the shadows, Tatanysha was undergoing a terrifying internal metamorphosis. The woman who had married him, who had shared a life with him, was being systematically dismantled by the truth of what he had done. In her place, a cold, calculating avenger was taking shape. This wasn't a sudden explosion of violence, a frantic lashing out that would be over in seconds. This was something far more dangerous. This was a rage that simmered, a hatred that was being distilled into a pure, concentrated poison. She looked at this man, her husband, the stepfather to her child, and she didn't see a partner. She saw a monster that needed to be put down. But how? That was the question that consumed her. In the twisted logic of deep trauma, standard justice felt like an insult. She thought about the police, the courts, the sterilized process of the legal system. It felt insufficient. It felt sterile. Then, her mind turned to violence. She thought about killing him. She thought about a gun. In the American narrative of revenge, the gun is the ultimate tool, quick, decisive, lethal. But as Tatanysha played this scenario out in her mind, she found it lacking. To put a bullet in his head would be to grant him an exit. It would be a release. The lights would simply go out. He wouldn't suffer. He wouldn't know the depth of her fury. As she later told the detectives with bone-chilling clarity, shooting him was too nice. Think about the darkness required to arrive at that conclusion. To view murder as an act of kindness, and to reject it because it is too kind. She needed a method that would mirror the violation he had inflicted. He had taken something precious and fragile, her daughter's innocence, and destroyed it. He had left a scar that would last a lifetime. Therefore, his punishment had to be equally lasting, equally horrific. She wanted him to feel. She wanted him to scream. She wanted the pain to be the last thing he knew, a pain so encompassing that it would erase everything else. The idea of fire likely came to her as a solution to this equation of pain. Fire is primal. It is the most ancient fear of every living creature. It doesn't just kill, it devours. It strips away the skin, the identity, the very humanity of a person. To set a human being on fire is to unleash a demon in the room. It is a sentence of torture. It is slow, it is messy, and it is agonizingly loud. By choosing fire, Tatanysha was choosing to bypass the laws of man and invoke a wrath that felt almost biblical. She wasn't just going to kill Vincent Phillips. She was going to incinerate him. She was going to burn the sin right out of his flesh. The resolve hardened like concrete. There was no trembling hand, no hesitation born of morality. The morality of the civilized world no longer applied in that apartment in Renton. There was only the code of the mother, and under that code, Vincent had forfeited his right to a painless death. She knew what she had to do. It wasn't enough to wish him dead. She had to facilitate the transition. She needed tools. She needed an accelerant. The plan moved from the abstract to the concrete. She wasn't just a wife anymore. She was an executioner planning the logistics of the pyre. The house was quiet, but inside Tatanysha's mind, the flames were already roaring. It was late. The world outside was winding down, settling into the heavy, quiet darkness of the early morning hours. Most of Renton was asleep, but Tatanysha was awake, fueled by a singular, terrifying purpose. The decision had been made, the verdict delivered in the silent court of her mind. Now, it was time for the execution. She moved with the uncanny, robotic calmness of someone who has nothing left to lose. She didn't pace the floor or wring her hands. She simply gathered her things and walked out the door. She had an errand to run. She got into her vehicle, likely the red truck that would later become a focal point of the manhunt, and drove into the night. Her destination wasn't a secret hideout or a weapons dealer. It was a gas station. It's a mundane setting, a place of fluorescent lights and weary travelers buying coffee and lottery tickets. But that night, under the harsh glare of the canopy, Tatanysha wasn't filling up her tank for a road trip. She was buying a weapon. She purchased a container of gasoline. The smell of it, sharp, chemical, stinging the nose, usually signifies travel or chores. To Tatanysha, it must have smelled like justice. She capped the container, paid, and got back into her car. The drive back to the apartment on Martin Luther King Jr. Way must have been surreal. The streetlights passing by, the hum of the engine, the canister of liquid fire sitting right there beside her. She was ferrying a bomb back to her own home. When she arrived back at the apartment complex, the silence was absolute. It was the dead of night. She parked the truck and carried the gasoline inside. The key turning in the lock, the door creaking open. These were the sounds of a routine return, sounds that usually signal safety. But tonight, they signaled the end. Inside the apartment, the atmosphere was thick with sleep. The air was still, but there was a complication, an innocent variable in the equation. A family friend was staying with them, asleep on the living room couch. This detail adds a layer of chilling suspense to the scene. Tatanysha had to walk past this person. She had to creep through the living room, carrying a jug of gasoline, while someone lay just feet away, breathing deeply in the unconscious vulnerability of sleep. The friend didn't stir. They didn't wake up to ask, "What are you doing?" or "What's that smell?" They remained oblivious, a sleeping witness to the prelude of a massacre. Tatanysha moved like a ghost. She didn't let the presence of a witness deter her. Her focus was absolute. She wasn't worried about being seen. She was past the point of caring about consequences. Her eyes were fixed on the bedroom door, the threshold to the chamber where Vincent lay. She navigated the shadows of her own home, a space that was once shared, now divided into hunter and prey. Every step was calculated. She was closing the distance between the thought and the deed. The gasoline sloshed quietly in its container, a liquid promise of agony. She reached the bedroom door. It was likely open or slightly ajar, allowing the sounds of Vincent's sleeping breath to drift out. That rhythmic breathing, the sound of a man at peace, must have stoked the fires of her rage even higher. He was sleeping comfortably. He was resting. After what he did to her daughter, he was daring to sleep. That peace was an insult. It was time to wake him up. It was time to turn the bedroom into an oven. She stepped across the threshold, the floorboards silent under her feet, and prepared to unleash the inferno. The date is July 16th, 2014. The time is somewhere in the deepest, darkest trench of the early morning, that hour when the night has fully settled and the dawn is still a distant promise. The apartment is wrapped in a silence so profound it feels heavy, like a physical weight pressing against the walls. Inside the master bedroom, the air is still. The curtains are likely drawn, shutting out the streetlights, creating a cocoon of shadow. In the center of this darkness lies Vincent Phillips, 52 years old, sound asleep in the bed he shares with his wife. He is lost in the rhythm of his own breathing, the deep, steady respiration of a man who believes he is safe in his own castle. He is unconscious, his body relaxed, his mind likely drifting through dreams that are miles away from the reality standing right beside him. Tatanysha Hedman is now in the room. She has crossed the threshold, the silent specter of retribution. She stands over the bed, looking down at the shape of her husband under the sheets. In her hands, she holds the container of gasoline. It is a heavy, sloshing weight, a plastic vessel filled with liquid destruction. The cap is off. The smell begins to escape, that distinct, sharp, chemical odor of hydrocarbons. It is a smell that belongs in a garage or a workshop, not in a bedroom. It is an alien scent in this space of rest, a pungent warning that something is terribly, terribly wrong. The fumes begin to drift through the stagnant air, invisible tendrils reaching out to fill the room, perhaps tickling Vincent's nose, but not enough to wake him. Not yet. Imagine standing there, in her shoes. The adrenaline must have been surging through her veins, a cold, electric current. She watches his chest rise and fall. Inhale. Exhale. Every breath he takes is an insult. Every peaceful moment he enjoys is a stolen luxury. In her mind, the image of her daughter, the victim, the child whose trust was shattered, is superimposed over the sleeping form of this man. The contrast is maddening. Here lies the predator, resting comfortably, while his victim lives with the trauma. The injustice of his sleep is what likely steely her resolve. He shouldn't be sleeping. He should be suffering. He should be afraid. The room feels smaller now, the walls closing in as the moment of action approaches. The tension is pulled taut, like a wire about to snap. There is no turning back. If she walks away now, he wakes up tomorrow, he eats breakfast, he continues to exist. That is not an option. The script has been written, and she is the director. She adjusts her grip on the container. The liquid inside shifts. The sound of the gasoline moving against the plastic is the only noise in the room besides his breathing. It is a wet, sloshing sound, the sound of a wave about to crash. She doesn't wake him to deliver a speech. There are no dramatic last words. No, do you know what you did? She doesn't want him to have the dignity of a defense. She wants him to wake up in hell. The element of surprise is her greatest weapon. He needs to go from the comfort of a dream to the agony of the inferno in a split second. The anticipation hangs in the air, thick and suffocating. The fumes are getting stronger, pooling around the bed, soaking into the atmosphere. The fuse is lit in her mind. The match is waiting. The gasoline is ready. The silence of the room is about to be shattered forever. Tatanysha takes a breath, steadying herself against the horror of what she is about to do, and prepares to pour the nightmare onto the man who created it. The stillness of the bedroom was about to be violated. In the most horrific way imaginable. Tatanysha didn't just sprinkle the gasoline. She didn't hesitate or shake. She tipped the container with the grim determination of an executioner. The liquid, heavy and pungent, gushed out. It wasn't a trickle, it was a deluge. It splashed onto the bedsheets, soaking instantly into the fabric. It poured over Vincent's chest, his neck, his sleeping face. Imagine waking up to that sensation, the sudden, shocking coldness of fluid drenching you in the middle of the night. For a split second, in that foggy space between sleep and wakefulness, Vincent might have thought there was a leak in the ceiling, or perhaps he was dreaming of drowning. He likely gasped, sputtering as the liquid filled his nose and mouth. But the smell, that unmistakable, stinging chemical reek of gasoline, would have hit his brain like a sledgehammer before his eyes even opened. He started to thrash, a primal panic setting in as the fumes burned his lungs. "What are you doing?" He might have tried to scream, or perhaps it was just a gargled cry of confusion. But Tatanysha wasn't there to answer questions. She wasn't there to explain. The time for words had passed. This was the time for fire. As he struggled, wet and terrified, realizing the liquid soaking his skin was fuel, she made her final move. She didn't offer him a towel. She offered him a spark. Whether it was a match struck against a box or the flick of a lighter, the result was the same. The tiny flame appeared, a small, dancing light in the gasoline-soaked darkness. It was the only warning he got. And then she dropped it. The reaction wasn't a slow build. It wasn't like lighting a campfire. When gasoline fumes meet an open flame in a confined space, the result is explosive. Whoosh. The sound was likely a dull, heavy thump of air being rapidly consumed. In less than a heartbeat, the bed was no longer a piece of furniture. It was a pyre. The flames didn't just catch, they roared. They leaped up with a violent, hungry energy, turning the air instantly orange and scorching hot. The oxygen in the room was sucked into the conflagration, feeding the beast Tatanysha had just unleashed. The transition from the quiet, dark bedroom to a blinding inferno was instantaneous. 1 second, there was only the sound of breathing. The next, there was the deafening roar of fire and the terrified, high-pitched scream of a man being consumed. Vincent was at the center of it, the fuel for this sudden hell. The fire wasn't just around him, it was on him. The gasoline that had soaked into his clothes and skin ignited, turning him into a living torch. The heat would have been intense enough to singe eyebrows and blister paint across the room. Tatanysha, standing just feet away, must have felt the blast wave of heat wash over her, a physical force pushing her back. The shadows were banished, replaced by the flickering, chaotic light of the flames dancing on the walls, casting monstrous shapes that writhed in time with the man burning in the bed. The deed was done. The weapon had been fired. The monster was burning. The transition from sleep to fire was instant and absolute. Vincent Phillips didn't just wake up. He was catapulted into a world of blinding, searing agony. The human brain struggles to process pain of that magnitude. There is often a split second of shock, a disconnect where the mind tries to reject what is happening. But fire is persuasive. It doesn't wait for permission to hurt. It eats. The flames roared around him, a sudden, violent orange world that replaced the darkness of the bedroom. The heat was crushing, searing the air from his lungs before he could even draw a breath. But scream he did. It was a sound that tore through the apartment walls, a primal, guttural noise that no human throat should ever have to make. The sound of a man realizing he is burning alive. He scrambled off the bed, a frantic, stumbling mass of confusion. The instinct to run, to escape the source of the pain, took over. But he couldn't outrun the fire because the fire was on him. It was soaked into his skin, his clothes, his hair. He crashed out of the bedroom and into the hallway, a living torch. The walls flickered with the manic light of the flames that clung to his body. He was moving fast, fueled by the sheer terror of being consumed, leaving a trail of smoke and the sickening smell of burning fabric in his wake. In the living room, the family friend who had been sleeping on the couch was jolted awake. Imagine the horror of that moment. Waking up to a scream that curdles the blood, opening your eyes in the dark, and seeing a nightmare charging towards you. The police reports would later describe the witness seeing Vincent looking like Ghost Rider, a reference to the comic book character whose head is a flaming skull. It's a gruesome, surreal comparison, but it captures the sheer impossibility of the sight. A man, fully engulfed in fire, running through his own home. The witness, still shaking off the fog of sleep, was thrust instantly into a scene of absolute chaos. The friend didn't freeze. Despite the shock, the instinct to help kicked in. They saw a human being burning and reacted. They grabbed a blanket, desperate to smother the flames, to stop the screaming. They might have shouted, "Get down, roll," or perhaps they just threw the fabric over him, tackling the burning man to the ground. The struggle on the floor was frantic. limbs thrashing, the fire hissing as the blanket cut off its oxygen, the groans of a man whose skin was peeling away. The witness fought the fire with their bare hands, patting down the hot spots, trying to save the life of the man who had just run out of hell. The flames were extinguished, but they left behind a smoking, charred ruin. Vincent lay there, groaning, his body a map of burns, the adrenaline beginning to fade into the terrifying reality of shock. The fire was out, but the horror was just beginning. The flames were gone, but the fire had left its mark. The apartment was now filled with the thick, acrid smoke of burnt fabric and the sickeningly sweet smell of scorched flesh. Vincent Phillips lay on the floor for a moment, his chest heaving, the air rattling in his damaged lungs. The adrenaline that had propelled him out of the bedroom was still surging, masking the worst of the pain for a few merciful seconds. But the reality of his condition was setting in fast. His skin, once whole, was now a ruin. The reports are gruesome. They speak of skin peeling away, of raw, red agony exposed to the air. He wasn't just burned, he was flayed by heat. The pain began to bloom, not as a sharp sting, but as a consuming, rhythmic throb that seemed to pulse with every beat of his heart. It was a sensory overload, a screaming alarm from every nerve ending that signaled catastrophic damage. In the chaos of the living room, amidst the smoke and the screams, Tatanysha Hedman made her choice. She didn't drop to her knees to help. She didn't call 911. She looked at the man she had just set ablaze, the man who had tormented her daughter, and she turned away. The satisfaction of the act was likely clashing with the sudden, terrifying reality of consequences. The sirens hadn't started yet, but she knew they were coming. She grabbed her keys. She moved with the same cold efficiency she had used to buy the gasoline. She walked out of the apartment, leaving the door open to the horrors inside, and climbed into her red Chevrolet truck. The engine roared to life, a stark contrast to the moans of the dying man inside, and she sped away, disappearing into the morning traffic of Renton, a fugitive leaving the scene of her own judgment. Back inside, Vincent knew he couldn't stay. The apartment felt like a tomb. The air was unbreathable, and the memory of the flames was too fresh. Survival instinct is a powerful, primitive force. It can make a broken body move when it should be immobile. Vincent pushed himself up. Every movement must have been torture, the skin stretching and tearing, but he scrambled to his feet. He needed help. He needed people. He needed the world to see what had happened to him. He didn't wait for an ambulance to find him in the dark hallway. He ran. He burst out of the apartment complex, a terrifying figure stumbling into the daylight. He wasn't wearing a coat or shoes. He was wearing the remnants of his immolation. He made his way toward the nearest sign of life, a convenience store. It was a 7-Eleven on Sunset Boulevard, a beacon of normalcy with its bright lights and promise of safety. To anyone driving by, he must have looked like a hallucination, a man stumbling, erratic, smoking, his body a canvas of burns. He didn't stop. He pushed through the pain, fueled by the sheer terror of death, and headed straight for the glass doors. He was a walking testament to violence, seeking sanctuary in the most mundane of places. Imagine a typical Tuesday morning at a convenience store. It is around 8 a.m. The sun is up, the world is waking up. Inside the 7-Eleven on Sunset Boulevard, the air smells of brewing coffee and sugary donuts. Commuters are shuffling in, eyes bleary, grabbing energy drinks or newspapers, their minds occupied with the mundane stresses of the day: traffic, emails, bills. The clerk behind the counter is likely bored, watching the clock, waiting for the morning rush to subside. It is a sanctuary of the ordinary, a place where nothing truly exciting or terrifying ever happens. The fluorescent lights hum their steady, monotonous tune. The door chimes, ding-dong, announcing another customer. The clerk looks up, expecting to see a construction worker or a student. Instead, they see a nightmare walking. Through the glass doors stumbles Vincent Phillips. But he doesn't look like a man anymore. He looks like something that has crawled out of a war zone. He is naked, or nearly so, his clothes having been incinerated or torn away in his frantic escape. His skin is a road map of agony, blackened, red, peeling away from the muscle and sheets. Smoke is literally rising from his body, a ghostly trail that follows him into the air-conditioned coolness of the store. The smell hits the customers before he even speaks, that undeniable, stomach-churning odor of burnt hair and seared flesh that triggers a primal gag reflex in anyone who breathes it in. The boredom of the morning vanishes instantly, replaced by a collective gasp of horror. Vincent isn't shopping. He is dying. He stumbles toward the counter, his movements jerky and erratic, like a marionette with cut strings. He is screaming, but it's not a coherent sentence at first. It's a raw, high-pitched shriek of pure suffering. "I'm on fire. I'm on fire," he bellows, his voice cracking with the strain. The fire is out, extinguished by the blanket back at the apartment, but to Vincent, the flames are still raging. The nerve endings, exposed and raw, are sending a single, relentless message to his brain. Heat. He feels like he is still burning alive. He claws at the air, his eyes wide with a terror that goes beyond pain. He is begging for water, for ice, for anything to stop the sensation of being consumed. The clerk freezes. The phone is in their hand, but their fingers feel numb. How do you process this? A man has just walked in from the street looking like a casualty of an explosion. "Help me!" Vincent screams again, collapsing against the counter, smearing ash and blood on the clean surface. "Please help me." The customers recoil, pressing themselves against the back aisles, terrified to touch him, terrified to look away. One brave soul might have stepped forward, perhaps stripping off a jacket to cover him, but the fear is palpable. What happened to him? Was it a car crash? A chemical spill? Then, amidst the gasps and the frantic dialing of 911, Vincent gasps out the truth. It isn't a long confession. It doesn't need to be. With the last of his strength, fighting through the shock that is rapidly shutting down his body, he points a trembling, charred finger toward the door, toward the life he just ran from. "My wife." He wheezes, the words wet and heavy. "My wife did this. She set me on fire." The silence that follows that statement is heavier than the screams. His wife. The person who is supposed to love him, to protect him. The domestic nature of the violence makes it infinitely more terrifying. This wasn't a random accident. This was a targeted hit. The sirens begin to wail in the distance, getting louder and louder, a chorus of help rushing toward the store. The paramedics burst in, their faces setting into masks of professional focus as they take in the severity of his injuries. They work quickly, cutting away what remains of his clothing, starting IVs, wrapping him in sterile burned sheets. They load him onto the stretcher, his screams turning into low, rhythmic moans as the drugs begin to take hold. As they wheel him out to the waiting ambulance, the store is left silent again, but the air is different now. It is tainted. The coffee still brews, the lights still hum, but the mundane reality has been shattered. A man was just burned alive by his wife, and the ghost of his agony hangs in the aisle, a terrifying reminder of the secrets that burn behind closed doors. The sirens that screamed toward the 7-Eleven were echoed by another set of flashing lights cutting through the morning gray at the apartment complex on Martin Luther King Jr. Way. When the police arrived at the scene, the air was already heavy with the aftermath of violence. They didn't need a map to find the unit. The smell guided them. It was a thick, suffocating odor that clung to the damp morning air, a volatile mix of burnt synthetic fabric, charred wood, and the unmistakable, stinging chemical scent of gasoline. It was the smell of a crime scene that was still exhaling its horror. Officers moved with weapons drawn, their senses dialed to maximum. They didn't know if the shooter, or in this case, the burner, was still inside. They swept the apartment, moving room by room. The living room was a scene of struggle. Furniture knocked over, a blanket scorched and thrown aside, the remnants of the desperate battle the witness had fought to extinguish the human torch. But it was the bedroom that told the true story. The master bedroom was the epicenter of the inferno. The bed was a blackened ruin, the mattress soaked and singed, the sheets fused together in a grotesque sculpture of melted polyester. On the floor, the evidence of premeditation lay in plain sight, a gas container. It wasn't a household accident. It wasn't a candle left burning. This was a deliberate, calculated act of war. The detectives who arrived later would piece together the timeline with chilling accuracy. They noted the burn patterns, the splash marks that indicated a heavy pour, the specific trajectory of the accelerant. This wasn't a splash, it was a dousing. They spoke to the witness, the family friend who was still trembling, their eyes wide with the shock of seeing a man they knew turned into a ghost rider. The witness's account was fragmented but consistent. The scream, the fire, the escape. And then, the name. Tatanysha. The radio waves crackled with the urgency of a manhunt. Suspect is a black female, approximately 40 years old, driving a red Chevrolet truck. Considered dangerous. The description went out to every patrol car in Renton and the surrounding areas. The city became a grid, a net tightening around the fugitive wife. Officers scanned traffic, checking license plates, looking for the flash of red paint that would signal her location. They didn't know her state of mind. Was she remorseful? Was she planning to hurt herself? Or was she, having crossed the line into attempted murder, capable of more? The search was intense, but short-lived. Tatanysha hadn't fled to Mexico. She hadn't vanished into the wilderness. She was still in the area, perhaps paralyzed by the gravity of what she had done, or perhaps simply waiting for the inevitable. When police located the red truck, there was no high-speed chase, no shootout. They boxed her in. The lights flashed, the commands were shouted. Hands where I can see them. Step out of the vehicle. And Tatanysha Hedman emerged. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like a woman who had reached the end of her rope. There was a strange, eerie calm about her as the officers approached. They grabbed her wrists, pulling them behind her back. The metallic click-click of the handcuffs was the final punctuation mark on her freedom. She was read her rights, the Miranda warning reciting the protections she had just forfeited. As they placed her in the back of the cruiser, the cage separating her from the world, the transition was complete. She was no longer a wife, a mother, or a victim. She was the suspect in a first-degree assault and arson case. The hunt was over, but the question of why still hung in the air, a question she would answer in a room with a two-way mirror, revealing a darkness that would make even the seasoned detectives flinch. The interrogation room is a place where the air is always stale, recycled through vents that seem to hum with the ghosts of 1,000 confessions. It is a box of gray walls, a metal table, and a mirror that only looks one way. This is where Tatanysha Hedman sat. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't weeping into her hands, begging for forgiveness. According to the detectives who sat across from her, she possessed a chilling, almost unnatural composure. The adrenaline of the act had faded, leaving behind the hard, cold residue of her decision. They asked her the standard questions. Did you do it? Why did you do it? They expected a denial, or perhaps a claim of self-defense, a story about a fight that got out of hand. Tatanysha didn't offer excuses. She offered a philosophy of revenge. She looked the investigators in the eye and laid out the terrifying logic that had guided her. She admitted to pouring the gasoline. She admitted to striking the flame. But it was her reasoning that made the seasoned officers pause, a moment where the scribbling of pens stopped and the room went dead silent. When asked why she didn't just leave or call the police or even use a weapon that would have ended it quickly, she delivered the line that would define this case forever. Shooting him, she said, her voice steady, was too nice. It wasn't a throwaway comment. It was a window into the depth of her hatred. A bullet is fast. A bullet is mercy. Fire is suffering. She wanted him to feel every second of his destruction, just as her daughter would feel the scars of his abuse for the rest of her life. She told them, plainly, that she wanted him to burn. She wanted to erase him. The detectives, men and women who deal with violence every day, were staring into the face of a mother's primal wrath, a force that had completely bypassed the laws of society to deliver a biblical punishment. While Tatanysha was being booked into the King County Jail, charged with assault in the first degree and arson in the first degree, charges that carried decades of prison time, the other half of the story was unfolding in the sterile, beeping world of the intensive care unit at Harborview Medical Center. Vincent Phillips was alive, but he was broken. His body was a landscape of grafts and bandages, his recovery uncertain. But the fire had done more than burn his skin. It had burned away his cover. Tatanysha's accusations were not just the ravings of a vengeful wife. They were the catalyst for a parallel investigation. The police looked into her claims. They looked at the daughter. And the truth, dark and undeniable, came to light. Vincent Phillips was charged with first-degree child molestation. The man lying in the hospital bed, fighting for his life against the burns, was now fighting a legal battle that labeled him a predator. The irony was thicker than the smoke in that apartment. Tatanysha was behind bars for trying to kill a monster, and the monster was in critical care, technically a victim of assault, yet rightfully accused of a crime that many would argue deserved the flames. The story ends not with a gavel, but with the wreckage of a family. A mother in a cell, facing a future where she might never see her child grow up freely. A stepfather in a burn unit, facing the consequences of his perversion. And a 7-year-old girl, the silent center of this tragedy, left to pick up the pieces of a life where the two people supposed to protect her had destroyed each other. Tatanysha Hedman made a choice that night. She chose fire over law. She chose vengeance over freedom. And as the heavy steel door of her cell slid shut, echoing through the concrete halls, one thing was certain. Vincent Phillips would carry the scars of her justice for the rest of his life. Every time he looked in a mirror, every time he felt the tightness of his healed skin, he would remember the night his wife decided that shooting him was simply too kind.